every now and then I bring examples from practice to show the consequences of Brexit. And that's what I want to do today, because the Swiss NZZ has accompanied a trucker on a long journey and published a very impressive report on how he toured from Great Britain to Basel. The 61-year-old Andy Wignall is one of the last remaining English truck drivers. For almost 40 years he has been crossing the English Channel by truck once a week. In 2016 he voted out of conviction for Brexit, which is now causing considerable friction in the goods trade. Andy Wignall looks annoyed at the screen in the corridor of Deck 4 and curses softly to himself. The English Channel is rough and the wind is lashing a cloudy mix of rain and waves against the ferry windows. Andy is already delayed, and now there is a risk of further delays after the crossing from Dover to Dunkirk in France. The license plates of all the trucks that are on the ferry that Thursday afternoon are displayed on the screen he sees. A green dot means that all papers are in order and the truck can continue driving in France without physical controls. Next to the license plate of Andy's truck, however, an orange dot lights up. He has to go to customs immediately in Dunkirk. Until the end of 2020, such checks were never necessary on the crossing to the EU. However, since the UK left the EU internal market and the customs union at the beginning of January, various new controls have been necessary, even though the free trade agreement between Brussels and London prevented tariffs from being imposed on goods. Even experienced truckers like 61-year-old Andy do not yet understand all the regulations. I don't know what exactly the customs officers want. I only cross France in transit on the way to Switzerland, he says. About 6 hours earlier, Andy Wignall left the customs accredited inland depot of the Davis Turner Company in Dartford, around 30 kilometers east of London, in his black Volvo truck. All the formalities could be dealt with there, so that Andy no longer has to drive past an official Brexit customs clearance facility for the trip to Switzerland. He had actually hoped to be able to leave a day and a half ago. But because the new Brexit rules lead to complications for companies and freight forwarders, Andy had to wait 24 hours in a bonded warehouse in Birmingham for a delivery from Switzerland to be processed. But now the truck is ready to go. The waybill and the transit papers contain a mixture of goods that Swiss companies have ordered in Great Britain. Filter paper, clips for scaffolding and dye are in the trailer, as are screens and shoes from the English brand Clarks. Because of the lockdown, there is hardly any traffic, which is why Andy steers his truck towards Dover at high speed. You never know when the next traffic jam will come, he says with a laugh. Well, they usually call him Andy Express at the forwarding company Müller-Gesine in Basel, for which he works as an independent trucker. Allegedly, no driver makes the journey from Great Britain to Switzerland faster. In fact, Andy's job is a race against the clock. Each waiting time increases costs and stress as a carriers, and end customers are pushing for quick deliveries. Andy points to the tachograph above the windshield, which records to the minute whether the driver is complying with the legal driving times. On exceptional days like today, a working day of 15 hours with a night sleep of 9 hours is permitted, whereby a 45-minute break is prescribed after every 4.5 hours of driving. Anyone who disobeys the rules faces a hefty fine. Andy Wignall has been commuting between Great Britain and the continent as a truck driver since 1984 and has been driving to Switzerland once a week for around 30 years. He has never seen large-scale inspections at Dover Harbour. But now France is demanding that every chauffeur prove a negative COVID-19 test followed by passport control before entering the Schengen area. In the past, the French hardly checked us, but now they tighten the screw, says Andy. There are no traffic jams because the volume of traffic on the English Channel is much lower than usual. Many companies filled their warehouses in the old year, and many goods get stuck in factories and warehouses because of the new Brexit bureaucracy. Andy still has to wait. In the shipping company's office, the paint he is transporting is classified as a dangerous good. That makes everything more complicated now. Instead of the next ship to Calais, Andy is only allowed to take the ferry to Dunkirk, on which his truck can be chained to the outside deck. On the ferry, a wiry seaman directs the truckers to the canteen, where they receive the plate of fried fish, vegetables and potatoes included in the fare. Andy knocks out casual comments with the seaman, but he doesn't seek contact with the other drivers. Well, the majority of them come from Poland, Romania, the Baltic states, or Bulgaria. Because of the pressure on wages over the past 15 years, no English people wanted to do the job today, says Andy. He openly admits that he mourns the old days, the conviviality at the rest areas or the logbook in which one could still record the driving times by hand. Today he has to be on his guard because irregular migrants tried again and again to penetrate his trailer in order to get to England via the channel. The migrants are handled with kid gloves, explains Andy. We truckers, he says, on the other hand, are suspected of being human smugglers. The Brexit controls in Dunkirk took less long than feared, and Andy is already driving the truck through the evening rain onto the motorways towards Lille, Reims and Nancy. A French customs officer had taken the transit papers from Andy in a large parking lot, but returned them to him after a 15-minute inspection in the office. If there had been more trucks, we might have stood here for hours, said Andy thoughtfully. In 2016, he voted for Brexit out of conviction. Today, he describes Prime Minister Boris Johnson as Santa Claus, who promises a lot but knows nothing about real life. But he still hopes that Brexit will lead to higher fees for EU camp events in Great Britain, and that after the end of the free movement of people, wages for simpler jobs for Britons will rise. Andy had believed that the exit from the EU would hardly affect him, as there were customs controls between the non-EU member Switzerland and Great Britain before Brexit. But he cannot avoid delays on the way to Switzerland. Anyway, Brexit has been a losing business for him so far. He earns his money in British pounds, which is why the price losses after the referendum hit him hard. It's 15%, by the way. Due to the new VAT rules, the cost of diesel, which Andy likes to fill up in Luxembourg, has also risen. Until shortly, before Christmas, his future was completely in the balance. Christmas was the date when the contract came up. If London and Brussels had not reached an agreement, he would not have received a permit for transit journeys through the EU. Andy lives with his wife, who works as a transportation manager for his sole proprietorship on Canvey Island, 60 kilometers east of London. In order to pay the cost of living and the loan for the truck, he would have had to get by with domestic transport in a no-deal Brexit. That would have been a big disappointment, admits Andy, but he still voted for it. Then he turns on the car radio and drives into the night to the sound of the rock band AC/DC. The town of Lunéville near Nancy was snowed in on Friday morning. Andy spent the night here in a parking lot next to the Autobahn on the bed in the truck cabin behind the driver's seats at 21 degrees Celsius as he loves. But now there's no time to lose on the remaining 180 kilometers to Basel. Andy knows the route like the back of his head. No, the back of his head, that was Scotty on Star Trek, the back of his hand. He can tell an anecdote about every rest stop and knows which restaurants are served by the truck drivers who are still eating out despite the time and the cost pressure. The Andy Express cannot be stopped by the snow or by colleagues from work who are stuck on the way to the border crossing in Weil am Rhein because the legal travel time has expired. Yeah, the German Autobahn police is very strict on that one. At the border, the customs officers repeatedly turn away lorries with the wrong documents or direct them to the area for customs clearance for a closer inspection. Andy, on the other hand, gets through faster on the transit lane. First, the German official stamps the papers. Then Andy shows his documents to the Swiss customs house and pays the heavy vehicle tax. Then he drives directly to the Dreispitz district in Basel to the forwarding company Müller-Gysin, which is accredited by customs as an approved recipient and can therefore register and invest the goods directly. The managing director, Thomas Baumann, is happy that Andy made the trip without any major problems. But he believes that Brexit will not only lead to significant complications in freight traffic in the short term, which could also indirectly affect shipment to Switzerland. In Switzerland, we can only cope with the formalities because we have well-trained customs agents and 10% less trade than the British, says Baumann. Well, but in Great Britain, there is a lack of experienced specialists everywhere. And so they needed 50,000 more of them. Andy may therefore have to struggle with delays that make the business more expensive. For a trip of 3,000 kilometers, Andy charges around £2,000 sterling, little of which remains after all expenses have been deducted. Nevertheless, it has long been much more expensive than the Macedonian drivers that Müller-Gysin employs. Baumann emphasizes that the company is still sticking to him, and he means the Andy Express. The Andy Express is not only fast, but also reliable. But Andy no longer hears the boss's praise. He has to deliver goods and load new goods because he wants to start the return journey before the counters at the border close on Friday evening. At one company, however, the export papers are not ready. It's one too late. Now he can only leave on Monday. And instead of going to England, he will spend the weekend alone in a truck in Basel with his wife. Sure, that's annoying, says Andy. But it's out of my control. And that's a sentence you will hear many times in the future and many times right now. It's out of my control. And if you want to stay informed, please subscribe to my channel and to my other channels. I'll see you in my next video. Auf Wiedersehen.